I'm really lucky today. I've got Dick Jenkins with me. It's an old friend of mine. We've been dealing with Vectorworks for donkey's years. But Dick, you had some really interesting comments about this love-hate relationship with drawing. It brought back some good memories for you
Not all of them were good.
because they
It
were
brought
love
back
and hate.
it brought back the memories of you get out of design school and you think you'll be designing all these buildings and doing great things, and they stick you in the drafting room and you're doing window details and toilet room details and toilet room elevations and all those kinds of things that we never learned in school. So you had to either find out how to do them from old drawings, or if there's a mentor in there, usually there's always an old guy in the drafting room who knows what the what how things work. And I can just remember the days and days of drawing all of these details of things like I'd never seen. Like in drawing a window detail, half the time I didn't know at the time what it was I was drawing. And it was only when someone actually brought a model of a window in that I knew what all those lines in the drawings I was going by, what they meant. Those are the kinds of things that were brought back to mind. And then I've had my own business since 1985. And in the first 28 years of that business, I was doing all of architecture. And I just remember those years I was really discontent because what I loved was drawing. The reason I went to school was because I loved drawing. And then I find out when you're your own practitioner, drawing's only about 30% of everything that an architect has to do, especially if you're a one or two man firm. You're dealing with clients and building codes and contracts and specs. And
Plus, you've got to remember, you've got to pay the wages and you've got to do the marketing and you've got to answer the
yes,
phone. And there's a lot that goes in. Everyone thinks that if they're great at doing their job, then they should be their own boss. And they forget that there's a whole business that goes around that. But that's a completely different podcast. We'll talk about that another
yes.
day.
I was leading into when I was doing that, I find myself getting into the construction documents and figuring out how the buildings go together. And my business partner at the time would always fuss at me because he would say, "We need to hire somebody to do that. You need to be doing other stuff." And in my way of thinking, this is the part I really enjoy. So it was always that dichotomy of do I become an architect and do all of it when I hate 70% of it, or do I figure out some way to concentrate on the drawings and the documentation and all the things that I really loved?
I think you said to me earlier on before we started recording that you'd done this massive drawing, this gigantic 4 foot long
Machine.
drawing or something, or
Yes, where I grew up, there were no architects within a 70-mile radius. And when I got out of school, there were no jobs for architects. And so I had to live in my hometown. And I was lucky enough to find a job working for the engineering department of a farm equipment manufacturer. And so what I learned to do was to do exploded isometrics of farm equipment. And my masterpiece was it was an automatic sweet potato harvester that not only was self-propelled, but it would grade the sweet potatoes and drop them in boxes and hydraulically put the boxes down on the field. And what I had to do is go out to the shop and measure all the parts of this massive machine into a pen and ink isometric exploded drawing showing all of the parts. And it ended up being a 6 foot long drawing, 3 or 4 weeks to do because I had to do all
amazing.
the wiring, the
Mm.
hydraulics, the hydraulic pumps. The pumps exploded, everything. It was probably the most fun I've had on any project.
So the interesting thing I thought about that is that looking at a complex project like that and exploding it all out is in a way similar to thinking about a building, a complete building, and then
Right.
having to calculate all the little components that go together to make up our buildings. Our buildings are made out of thousands of components. We just don't realize how many there are. You talked about a window. You got the window frame, and there's loads of different manufacturers of window frames. Is it timber? Is it aluminium? Where I live, we use a lot of UPVC starting to come in. If you live in Europe, there's a lot of UPVC window joinery. So those are all very different constructions. Plus, each manufacturer then has their own shapes of those things. And
Yeah.
we have to make sure that we know how all that stuff goes together. You went to design school. My students are not going to design school. They're going to what you might call documentation school.
Oh,
So we teach them all of that stuff. So we teach them how a window goes together. We've got models of windows. We've got actual windows and doors all cut to pieces where the students can play with them. We've got lots of bits of timber. We've got loads of different cladding systems. We've got all the little bits. So when a student says, I want to know how this goes together, we can basically get all the little bits out and start to assemble
right.
so they can see how it goes. We do teach them drawing. We don't teach them isometric drawing because it's not a big thing these days. But I did wonder when you were talking to me about the doing the drawing and the love-hate relationship, did you post something on Facebook recently, a cartoon about the guy that was in the architect's office and was that you? That
Yes.
he's doing a kitchen, he's doing a bathroom detail, and
Yes.
he goes, oh, but he's so glad when I finish this bathroom design. It's driving me nuts. And his boss goes, oh, now that you're an expert in bathrooms, I've got another one for you.
Yes.
And the guy's really upset. And it
Well,
reminded me of,
going to say one of the surprises of owning your own business and working for other small firms, especially where I live, is that not all of the work is glamorous buildings. A lot of it is the mundane re-roofing jobs or window replacement jobs or things that require not necessarily the artistic design, but require some sort of knowledge of how products and pieces go together, those kinds of things. And that's
but,
sometimes that's the bread, what we call the bread and butter work.
mm-hmm. But didn't your mentor say that something to you about the creating good documentation for a project is just as valuable as creating the design?
Yes, I would. We when I first started working for who I'm calling my mentor, it was the first job I had after I got licensed, and we had a guy there who was a great designer. He could design things very quickly. He could draw them up very quickly, and I was always intimidated by him, mainly because he could design quickly. I'm more of a problem solver. I was never really good at the big idea, which this guy was good at the big idea. And where I would sit there and I would love solving the problems, he would get the whole design of a house done. And I was always intimidated by his speed and all that kind of stuff. And what my mentor was trying to tell me was that, first of all, he said it's not all about speed. He said, Corbusier said, design is a process. But he also reinforced that the job I was doing was just as important as the guy who was doing the big idea designs, and that I should take pride in the fact that I was doing something to create good buildings, but also something that I enjoy.
Taking that and then looking at those, what you called the bread and butter jobs, the mundane jobs, replacing windows, all that kind of stuff, that you should really be proud of the fact that you've helped that person's house by resolving what might be a damp problem, might be a leaky problem, and you've turned that house into a healthy home again. That is a valuable thing to do. We can't all be Foster and Rogers and do the flash stuff. There's a whole army of people that supports him and does air conditioning ducts for years on end. But I think that everything that you do on that project to change the lives of the client are valuable. And even if it's a re-roofing job, you're re-roofing it because the roof is unhealthy and you're
Yes.
replacing it with a warm, healthy roof and you're changing that client's life. You're making it better for them. So you should really look at we should be looking at our documentation as just as much a superstar as the guys who do the cool designs.
Yeah.
Uh,
The trouble is with design education in the United States, at least when I was 50 years ago when I was in school, all they talked about was like the big glamorous projects and the star architects. And we never even learned drawing my first 4 years of college. It was all about designing. And so what they depended on the people who hired you out of school to teach you how to do construction documents and how to put together sets of drawings and how buildings go together. And so it's just a big shock from going to design school where you think you're going to immediately work with a star architect doing great things, and you're doing roof details.
Well, I work so on one of the projects. So you and I had a little text message conversation outside this recording, and I said to you that you were talking about the bathroom, being a
Yeah.
bathroom expert. I worked on a shopping center project where, admittedly, I got to do a lot of design work. But one of the things I ended up doing was there were something like 50 exit stairs on the project, and it was my job to design the exit stairs, and each
Yeah.
one was different because the site sloped ever so gently. And so because the building was 300 yards long, gradually there was a different number of stairs in each one. And when I finished that project, I got onto another project which was in Portugal, and it was 3 buildings, 7 stories of car parking underground, two 7-story buildings and one 20-story building. And I got on the job because I was a stair expert. And so again, I was designing stairs all over again. I was happy because it was a time where they were firing people at work, and I
Right.
was happy to be employed. And I was a computer expert and I was a stair expert. So
Yeah.
I had 2 things going for me. But yeah, it's that thing where you're like, suddenly you're a stair expert. And I've spoken to Ethan about this before. You've heard me talk to Ethan on my
Yes.
podcast. And Ethan and I were staying in a hotel. And the first thing I did say, I said, Ethan, let's go down the fire escape. Let's see what the stairs are like. I said, oh my God, they're awful. They haven't done this right. They haven't done that right. And so it was just that funny thing that you think it's a challenge being that expert on that thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was that love-hate relationship with the stairs. But
My
you've
wife,
now moved off.
I was gonna say, my wife gets after me all the time because we'll be in a waiting room or somewhere, and I'm noticing everything that's not aligned.
Oh,
You know,
couldn't they
the
just lined up that fire?
HVAC and the lights and the electrical outlets and windows and
I went to the local airport. I go and sit upstairs where you can look out and see the planes. Except you
yeah.
can't look out and see the planes because the sill is here.
Yes.
Had they made the sill here, I could look out. It's so
Yeah.
annoying for say 4 inches,
Right.
or 100 mils. They could have made that so much more pleasant, but it's just not thoughtful. And
Yeah.
so it comes back to, I think it comes back to what your mentor said about the documentation is the part where you are taking the superstar design, but you're actually making it into reality.
Yeah.
So that those little things, and I'm a firm believer that design doesn't stop, because I was always taught that design doesn't stop when you start drafting.
Right.
Design doesn't stop until you issue the final certificate,
Yes.
because every decision you make on site, every detail you draw, everything you do right up to the final lick of paint is part of the design. And
Yes.
you shouldn't think just because I'm documenting, I'm not designing.
One of the things I've always been interested in is how do you make the drawings as clear as possible to the contractor? Because I run into problems even with the guy that I'm working for now. I'll suggest it might be better to do this detail in 3D because, with Vectorworks, you can build a model of something and pull it apart and really make it clear. And he's always reluctant to do that because he's used to details all being 2D flat on drawings. And I'm thinking sometimes I feel like we need to think outside the box and think about who it is we're communicating with.
There's a real move here to doing 3-dimensional window details because our windows are quite complicated. So we've got the building wrap, then we have to put tape around the corners of the building wrap, and then we have to do something else, and we've got to put the flashings in, and then there's always multiple flashings to go in. And so I've seen some people in Vectorworks, they actually draw about half a dozen isometrics on the
Yeah,
detail sheet,
yeah,
which show each stage of what needs to go on. And we've got a building code here which is called E2, and the acceptable solution shows the staging or the various parts. So if you've got a saddle flashing for a parapet wall that hits a vertical wall, they've actually got step by step. This flashing goes in first, then this goes in,
hmm
then that goes in, then that goes on top. And that really helps the contractor to see the staging of the detail. And I think we get to a point where we have to teach students the isometric drawing, or at least show them how to get it out of the computer. And
right.
Vectorworks makes it very easy to draw and to extract that in 3D. And then by using our viewports in classes, we could actually make bits turn on and off for each viewport
Yeah.
and make
Yeah.
it very easy that way. But it
Yeah.
is a movement. And if you go to, I did a detail recently for a concrete slab. I don't know if you saw my little freehand movie. I went to their website to find out about it, and they've got a little movie that shows the entire construction of a house, and it shows all the plumbing going
Oh,
in first. I thought, oh,
cool.
this is brilliant for my students. They can actually see the staging of a concrete slab right
Yeah.
from there's the ground, the bulldozer comes in, scoops it, then the plumbing goes in, then the backfill goes on top, then the sand goes on top, and then the insulation, then the formwork goes up, and then the concrete pours, the whole thing.
Yeah.
And it's just a really short animated movie, which is
Yeah.
brilliant for them to see that construction process.
Yeah.
I just wanted to follow up on your comments when you emailed me and said made you think about your days of a love-hate relationship with your drawings. And I'm glad you're loving it now because it's so much more fun.
It is. And I know what I'm doing now is I do totally everything I do now is just visualization and construction document creation from models. I model everything that I do, even down to the smallest details, even when it's not necessary sometimes, just because I kind of get a kick out of doing that. And also creating drawings that look nice and look good and look, they're readable. And like I say, I always am trying to think about what is the best way to convey the design to the person who's building it, but also to the clients. I'm just now getting to the point where the architect that I'm working for is willing to show his clients like walkthroughs and interior views of things. And that, I don't know, it just brings me a lot of joy to be able to do that. And I think it's just as much that creation of the drawing as it is.
I brought up an isometric view of a roof eaves detail that I've drawn on my computer, and I really showed it to Dick to explain how you can use the isometric view to emphasize to the contractor the parts and how they come together in 3 dimensions. It didn't take that long, but you can actually see I've actually spaced some parts out so that you
Yeah.
can see the eaves flashing, you can see the construction of the top plate. I've got a double top plate, you can see the way that I'll fix the rafter to it. And so that was just a sketch for a student to try to replicate, but really to try to get them, to encourage them to look at the 3-dimensional nature of the interrelationship. I'm
Right.
not sure if you heard Steve Skaysbrook on my podcast talking
I
about
did.
the 6. I thought that was brilliant when he was talking about the 6 parts, the 6 planes, forward, back, left, up, down. And you look at a detail like this and you can actually see where does it go, what does it go when it goes this way, where does it go when it goes that way, what happens when it goes down. And I think it's really important. But the thing I guess I really got from your conversation, Dick, was that where you say that the creating the documentation is just as valuable as the design, and that people that just document should really be proud of the fact that they are documenting a project that can be built.
Right. I agree. But I had to fight for a lot of my career. I had to fight people telling me that wasn't supposed to be what my interest was because I had architect after my name.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just a thing I had to get over.
Yep.
That
So if you're gonna give a word of advice to my students who are architectural technologists, we're teaching them documentation, a little bit of design. What would your advice be?
oh wow, to learn your craft as well as you can, to take pride in what you're doing, to know that you're just as integral a part of the whole thing as anyone else on the design team.
Yeah, great advice. Thank you very much for your time, Dick. Love talking to you.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's always a pleasure.